Hi, and welcome to the Keystone Reckoning podcast. This is Jesse White, your host. I've been away for a while. Well, I haven't been away for a while. The podcast has been away for a while, but I wanted to kickstart everything again. I've spent actually most of the last year out working on campaigns and doing some different things in some different counties. And now that that's kind of died down, I've been able to kind of focus back on a few different things. And one of the things that's really been on top of my list was getting the podcast going again. So here we are, and here I am. I have a lot of good episodes coming up, some really great interviews, some interesting things, people from all over the state talking about all sorts of different political things, from the practical to the academic to you name it. But I wanted to start right now, and I thought it was a good place, a good jumping off point to get back into talk about what is going on, what the hell is going on with the PA State House. I've had a ton of people reach out to me, being a former member and kind of knowing how the place works, asking me what is happening, because it's just it's almost too much to keep up with. So what I thought I'd do for this first episode is just kind of give a brief overview of where we're at, where we're heading, and why we may be heading there. And I'll preface it all by saying this: anybody that says they know definitely what is going on is absolutely lying or just plain out insane, because even in an institution that is a roller coaster kind of by design, this recent turn of events has really kind of outpaced anything that anybody could have imagined. So we'll start at the beginning, and I'll try to jump through the procedural history and get down to the kind of analysis of where we're at. So for anybody that hasn't been paying attention, Democrats won a shocking majority in the state house after this last set of elections in 2022. They emerged from everything after recounts and all the close calls and everything. They came out 102 to 101, 203 seats in the state house statewide. That was largely because of some great candidates and some great victories, and also because redistricting was able to start to fix some of the gerrymandering that had gone on, that had made the House virtually unwinnable for Democrats for a very long period of time. So it helped reset a few things and make some races competitive. One of the things that redistricting did was take some traditionally like solid blue seats and break them apart into some, for example, areas like Lancaster, Harrisburg, places like that, where there was like one solid blue seat in a sea of red. That is now, there might be two fairly solid blue seats there. And that's not gerrymandering. That's actually undoing gerrymandering that had gone on for years and years and years. So in any event, the day after the election, everybody wakes up and they're like, oh my God, do the math. It looks like we may actually be at 102 to 101. So then what happens? Well, it got really complicated because of those, of the 102, actually before election day, the state rep in the 32nd district, Tony DeLuca, had passed away. Tony, I could do a whole show just talking about Tony DeLuca and how amazing he was to serve with, and just what a great guy he was. I mean, just entertaining, and just the guys like that, they broke the mold with them. There'll never be folks like that back in state government. And I'll save my Tony DeLuca stories for another day. Maybe bring a couple other former colleagues on and we could talk about him, because he was just a trip. But anyway, he passes away. Then, so now you're at 101 to 101 because the seat was vacant. There's not, until it has been filled via special election, there's just nothing anybody can do. It's 101 to 101. So now there is no majority. Complicating matters even more was the fact that State Rep Summer Lee was elected to Congress. State Rep Austin Davis was elected lieutenant governor. They could have been sworn in on January 3rd, but Summer had to go be sworn in Congress, and you can't serve in both the state and federal government at the same time. Austin Davis could have stayed as a state rep until he was sworn in as lieutenant governor a couple of weeks later. But this is where it starts to get wild, is you had the leaders from both caucuses, Democrat and Republican, kind of jockeying for position as to what was going to happen, because nobody really knew what was going to happen on swearing-in day. Now, the way this works is constitutionally, state reps take office on December 1st. That's when they their terms of office technically begin. But they are not sworn in until the first Tuesday of the new year. It's a little complicated. The first thing they do when they assemble as a body is they elect a speaker. The speaker, generally from the majority party, then sets up the rules. They vote on the House rules and they, quote, organize the House. Committees form and all of that stuff. None of those things happened on January 3rd. So what happened was both the Democrats were actually down seats because of they were at 101 to 101 without Representative DeLuca. Then Summer Lee and Austin Daven both resigned in advance of swearing in day. So it actually put the Republicans in the majority, albeit temporarily. And just to make it clear, the 3 seats that were vacant by the death and the 2 resignations were actually, they're fairly solid Democratic seats. So it's kind of a foregone conclusion that those are going to be Democratic seats. Of course, anything can happen. Those special elections are actually slated for next week. But all things being equal, it's a safe bet that those are going to all be Democratic seats. The problem was they just didn't have the numbers on swearing in day to get to a majority, to get a speaker. So offline, there were all sorts of rumors speculating, was someone going to switch parties? Was there a deal being made? And it was fascinating because I will digress and tell one quick story that when I was elected in 2006, we had a very similar thing. We took the majority by one vote or one member. So it was 102 to 101. And we did not have the votes, unfortunately, to elect a Democratic speaker. That was going to be Bill DeWeese from Greene County. He was the Democratic leader. He didn't have the votes within the caucus to become speaker. And then the next thing you know, there were deals being floated, and it was announced that one of the Democratic reps was going to switch parties and become a Republican, which would have then given them a 102 to 101 majority. We go in for swearing in day, and nobody knows what's going to happen. And least of all, me or any of my new colleagues, because we were didn't even know where our parking spaces were. I mean, this was just wild. And we go in there, and what happens is we're getting ready to vote on a speaker. They go running up and down the aisle yelling, Denny O'Brien, Denny O'Brien. And we're like, who the hell's Denny O'Brien? Denny O'Brien was his state rep from outside of Philly, moderate Republican, good guy. He's went on to serve on Philly City Council. And he was the kind of consensus candidate for speaker. The deal came about in a meeting with then Governor Ed Rendell, and from all accounts was masterminded by a second-term state rep that you may or may not have heard of by the name of Josh Shapiro. True story. It was wild. So the very first thing I did as a Democratic state rep was vote for a Republican for speaker. And so we actually had a functioning Democratic majority, but a Republican speaker. Now that's important for this reason. One of the things that Denny O'Brien really cared about, his big issue, was autism. And as part of whatever went on, it was made very clear that he would be able to get those priorities, funding priorities, programming, and all of that addressed as speaker in a way that he probably wouldn't have been able to do as a rank and file member, certainly not in the minority party. So because that comes into play here. So fast forward from 2007 until 2023, and here we are, everything old is new again, and we're in a similar situation. So nobody really had the votes. And because and it gets complicated, but you need a majority of the eligible members. Now, with the 2 resignations and the 1 death, that actually took the number of members, eligible members down to 200 from 203, which means you would need 101 to get a majority. So, everybody talks about 102 votes being the number. That 102 is only based on the fact when there's 203 members in the House. But when there were only 200, 50% plus 1 is your constitutional majority. So you needed 101. they didn't know where they were going to get it from. Long story short, Republican state rep Jim Gregory gets up and nominates Democrat Mark Rossi as speaker in a move that from all accounts, nobody really saw coming. And it certainly was not planned very much or very far. He then gets the support of a big chunk of the Republicans in the House, including the Republican leadership, or a lot of the Republican leadership. It all happens really fast. And then the Democrats turn around and support Rossi for speaker. So he ended up winning with a substantial number of votes. And it just all happened, it was one of those things that happened in a blur, and everybody looked around and was like, what the hell just happened here? And so this is where it all starts to fall apart, is Speaker Rossi's big issue is pushing a constitutional amendment that would remove the statute of limitations for survivors of child sexual abuse. Mark is a victim of child sexual abuse, as was Jim Gregory, the Republican. The two of them have worked on this issue for a long time. I remember serving with Mark and talking with him about this issue all the way back then when I served on the Judiciary Committee, because that's where the issue had to go through. So the constitutional amendment that he's working on would remove that statute of limitations to allow sexual assault victims to go after the perpetrators of the crimes. There's a lot that goes into why that hasn't become a thing yet. A lot of it has to do with the Catholic Church, and again, that's a whole other discussion for a whole other day. The point is, it's one of those things that has broad public support, but internal politics has prevented it from becoming law. And probably just best to leave it there for right now. So they nominate Speaker Rossi. He takes the rostrum. There's a big confusion as to he gives an interview or gives some remarks right, in the moment that are immediately misinterpreted by just about everybody. In which Rossi says he's going to be a, quote, independent speaker. The Republican members read that as you are going to, as him saying, I'm going to change my party affiliation to independent. Democrats read that as I'm going to be independent minded, right? Rossi says that he's going to have, Democrats and Republicans on his staff, and, he's going to work towards bipartisanship and all these different things. Now, here's the funny part, is that everybody loves to hear talk about bipartisanship. Democrats have not been in control of the state house since they lost it in the Tea Party years in 2010. And before that, they'd only had the majority for 4 years out of 20 before that. So there are Democratic members who are chomping at the bit to get their priorities passed, and quite frankly, aren't really all that interested in bipartisanship. Because in the state house, being in the majority is everything. They control you run the agenda. You control everything. You raise more money at your fundraisers. You have lobbyists more willing to work with you. You have it's a binary thing. You're either in the majority or you're not, and it's a huge difference. So Democrats really weren't all that thrilled about this, this prospect of power sharing, especially when, if you forward flip the calendar forward just a little while, you're going to have, a very clear Democratic majority. So the question then became, why does any of this matter right now? Right? What's the point? If the Democrats are going to be in a majority in mid-February, what's the big deal? What could really happen between now and then? Because normally, the governor gives his budget address in February. That, because Governor Shapiro just got elected and sworn in, that isn't going to even happen until later. So, normally in February, you're having appropriations hearings. None of that's happening right now. Here's what it's all about. And it comes back to this issue of the constitutional amendments. And so the way the Constitution is amended in Pennsylvania, the state constitution, is language, the proposed amendment has to be passed in 2 consecutive sessions of the legislature. So each session is a 2-year period. So, if 21, 22 is one session, 23, 24 is another session. Then it is, if it passes each of the 2 sessions consecutively, then it goes on the ballot as a ballot referendum. And if it is approved by the voters, then it becomes law. So a few things about this. As we've seen, Republicans have really adopted and embraced the constitutional amendment route because they can avoid the governor's signature. There's nothing that Governor Shapiro or back then Governor Wolf could do to stop a constitutional amendment. He's just not part of the process. So it's a way to do things legislatively without having to worry about a veto, which would obviously kill the whole scenario. So you've got these constitutional amendments, and they are also almost always pass. The number, the statistics of what is passed and what hasn't passed over the last 20 years, it's overwhelmingly in favor. So Republicans, their ideas are pretty clear. They're like, well, let's just get these constitutional amendments. If we want to get something done, get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. There were several that were passed last session that would be teed up that could run this session. One was the abortion amendment that talks about the state's role in abortions. Republicans say it's vague and not a big deal, but if you read into it, it's clearly a big problem. There was also a voter ID amendment that would require voter ID not just for in-person, but also for mail-in voting, which creates all sorts of craziness that in terms of implementation that I can't even begin to parse in a short period of time. There was another one that has to do with bypassing the governor and the executive branch on certain regulations, specifically a lot of environmental stuff, which would basically just take the knees out from executive agencies like the Department of Environmental Protection and things like that. And there was the sexual assault statute of limitations. So there are 4. There was also one about the lieutenant governor being eliminating that as its own separate elected position and making it kind of a running mate with the governor. So technically there were 5 that are kind of on the table that are in play. I could tell you, and it's been proven out, the Republicans have no interest whatsoever in running the abortion amendment for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's not too hard to see that the shellacking that Republicans took generally in 2022, even in places like Kansas, over the issue of abortion, and especially because it was messaged just so expertly by groups like Planned Parenthood, by defining it as a freedom and things like that. They just did such an amazing job of doing the messaging. It became pretty clear that that's a loser for Republicans. They don't want to touch it. Why would they? They don't want the backlash. That's off the table. The lieutenant governor one seems to kind of go on the nobody cares at this point pile. Haven't really heard anything of it. Then you have the last 3. Of those, the voter ID amendment is clearly what the Republicans want, because if they can use that to suppress mail-in voting in 2024, that's the goal, right? That's what it is. They've watched. There's been a lot of stories about how how Democrats have won recent legislative cycles based on mail-in voting. And, unfortunately for Republicans, Trump and everybody else spent so much time and energy demonizing it that now they're like, oh, wait a minute, we probably need that. And you're starting to see an about face. But the other thought is, well, if we can make it really hard for people to vote by mail, then we will be able to, and if that suppresses the voter turnout, which would be almost exclusively Democratic, that helps us in 2024 in the presidential and trying to retake the legislative majority. That's their end game, right? And that's what I firmly believe is, and the regulatory thing is just that's just a money thing for them. if they can, the oil and gas industry and people like that, if they can find ways to, sidestep even the most basic environmental regulations, then that just fills their campaign coffers and makes them look great. So, and I would argue that, the impact of that one may actually be bigger than some of these others, but it's just not the sexy topic that's going to get everybody all worked up. Anyhow, so you have all these balls in play. So the Republicans in the Senate, firmly in the majority, they come into session and they pass the language that includes all three: regulation, voter ID, sexual assault protection. They pass them over as a package. And then they basically leave town. They're like, well, here you go. And it sets up this scenario where the House has a choice. They can either pass the package with all three, in which case they would all three go on the ballot at the same time for approval by the voters. Now, originally, the thought was that they wanted to run these in the May 16th primary election. That was kind of like the theory. I never quite believed it for a few reasons, but that ship has pretty much sailed, because there are some hefty guidelines for when they have to be legally advertised, and there's some hard and fast deadlines that just can't be avoided. I think the internal deadline given by the governor's office was February 1st-ish. Today, or right around today. In reality, I think they could probably go till about Valentine's Day and still get it done if they really wanted to. But they would, so what the Republicans in the Senate said were, okay, you've got to run all three, because they know that they just want them all to pass. And they know that if they run together, that's a better odds for the Republicans to get all three if you do them as a group. Now, the House members, Speaker Rozzi said, absolutely not. We're not running them together. I want the sexual assault amendment to run on its own first in the spring by itself. And I'm shutting the House down until we can make that happen. Pretty gutsy thing to say. Jim Gregory, the Republican who had nominated Rozzi for Speaker and has shared the same issue, said the same exact thing. He blasted his fellow Republicans for playing games and trying to lump these three together. But Jim Gregory also, we'll have to, someone needs to check in on him, because he then also, after nominating Rozzi for Speaker, then called on Rozzi to resign because he said he wasn't honest about switching his voter registration to independent, which I don't think it was ever clear that he actually claimed that he would. So Jim Gregory's just going after everybody. He's just having a time right now. He's just having a rough go of it. So the question is, what do you do if you're Rozzi and you're trying to get your amendment passed without the other two? Now, I will also say, Rozzi has given some quotes and some indications that he is not opposed to voter ID. Now, whether that's positioning or posturing or whatever, I don't know. But it wasn't like a non-starter with him. I believe the quote was, I know voter ID is important, or something like that on swearing-in day. So we're at this stalemate right now. Because, the other part, because we needed more layers to this, obviously, is that before leaving office, Governor Wolf called for a special session of the legislature, focusing on passing an amendment to protect survivors of sexual assault. A special session is just kind of like almost like a paper thing. But what it means is during, like, they gavel out regular session, they gavel in special session. But the thing is, they're in a special session, you're limited in what you can, like, what you pass has to be limited to the subject of the session, right? Like, you can't do other bills. You can't, it's a narrowly tailored thing. The problem is that the Republicans in the House were like, no, we don't need to do it in special session. We're going to do it in regular session because we want to do all three together. And right now, because they hold a majority because of the 3 vacancies, they can control basically how this works. I mean, they have a majority. They could control the floor. They could control the schedule. It became pretty obvious as this whole thing kind of devolved that nothing was going to happen. And, everybody just started like pissing everybody else off. There were like little things like because they couldn't even agree on rules. There were deals being floated and negotiations and things. And, I'd heard from a lot of people behind the scenes, but they couldn't come up to any agreements on anything. So without a set of rules, just like what happened at the federal Congress, without a set of rules, like, nothing happens. Everything's at a standstill. And that's where we're sitting now. So the speaker, what happened, to give you an idea of just how, like, much things were the cracks were starting to show. One day when they were all up at the Capitol and they couldn't get anything figured out, the House Republicans go up to the chamber when they were out of session. They go up to the House floor and take, like, the picture of, here we are, we're ready to work. Where are the Democrats? Which is, just a stunt. You see that kind of crap. Rozzi, I'm sure, based on pressure he got from Democratic colleagues, was like, okay, like, that's bullshit. And I am locking the doors to the chamber while we're not in session, that's like unheard of. But he was just like, I'm shutting it down. So he's not making friends. He's not in this to make a lot of friends, and he's not making a lot of friends. So the problem is, where does anybody go from here, right? What happens next? And so after these special elections, which are going to be next week, there should be a clear Democratic majority in the House. But that doesn't solve Mark Rozzi's problem. And I think that's where the pressure point lies here. There was an article in the AP today that says that he may not necessarily be looking to give up the speaker's gavel to Democratic leader Joanna McClinton, who had been the caucus's pick for speaker, the speaker designee. Because without Rozzi would be the 102nd vote, right? So he would have to actually agree to vote to remove himself as speaker for another Democrat. It's, that's a pretty big ask of the guy. So what happens next? The way I see it is that Mark Rozzi came for a reason to Harrisburg, which was to get this issue resolved, right? This sexual assault victims. It has been his issue since the minute he got there. He will never have a better opportunity to get it done than he does sitting in the speaker's chair or at the speaker's rostrum. I've heard from folks, and I get it, that there's an argument to be made that if you're him, you get what you came for, however you need to get it. The problem that he has is that no matter what happens in the House, they need the Senate to pass the Senate passed the bill or the resolution with all three amendments together. It doesn't need the governor's signature or approval, but it does need to be voted on by the House. If the House amends it, what the Senate sent over to strip out just the two and stay with just the sexual assault one, I'm 99% certain the Senate would then have to approve that amended version in order for just the assault one to run. The Senate's not going to do that because that doesn't get the Republicans what they want. They want the voter ID amendment. They want the regulatory amendment. So that's really the pressure point. I don't know what the only way to resolve this inside the state house is to pass the resolution sent from the Senate and do all three at once. Otherwise, you've got to play ball. You've got to get the Senate to play ball. I don't know how that happens, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't see them that anxious to make a deal. Why would they be? There's nothing in it for them. For a while, my worry or my gut instinct was that they would come to him and say, okay, we'll give you the assault amendment in the spring on its own. You give us the other two in the fall. Now, conventional wisdom was, the Republicans are going to want that the voter ID to run in the spring because they'll have a better chance of passing than in a general. I think that's just a smokescreen, because if you look at it, might actually be better the other way around, because Philly has a mayoral election this primary, county executive in Allegheny County. A lot of heavily Democratic cities like Harrisburg, Lancaster, that have city council type elections, those elections are generally over in the primary. So you get a huge drop off in off-year elections in heavily Democratic areas because there's just nothing to vote for, right? Everything's already been decided. And in order to beat voter ID, you are going to need those urban areas, heavily blue areas, a lot of heavily minority areas to show up and vote against the voter ID amendment. If they're not showing up in the fall anyway, isn't that almost exactly what the Republicans would want? So to me, it almost felt like the Republicans would, quote, give in, but in reality get what they wanted all along. And if you're Mark Rossi and you have been trying for 12 years to get this done and have been let down repeatedly by colleagues in both parties, be clear about this. The Republicans have been in the majority, but I'm telling you, having been in the room for some very awkward discussions, there was a bipartisan commitment to keep this thing, the sexual assault amendment, from becoming law. We can talk about it in much more detail later on. I'm going to have to get my notes and get my ducks in a row legally before I say too much more. But I'm telling you, Mark Rossi has been failed by both Democrats and Republicans in trying to get this done. And I'm sure and obviously nobody knows it better than him. If you're him, it's got to be damn appealing to get it done by any means necessary. And the theory being that the state house is, the state legislature is going to be a mess regardless. But you do what you came to do and you declare victory. And it's like the scene in Batman where, the Joker walks away and everything burns. Not that I'm suggesting Mark Rossi should put on a nurse's outfit and paint his face like Heath Ledger. Oh, that would be pretty awesome to see. But it's not the craziest idea. Now, what's been floated, what's been suggested, what's been offered, I don't know. But we're rapidly running out of time as to get anything done for the primary. We can't go a whole lot longer without the House being in session. Although I do think it's hilarious. There's this this pearl clutching. Oh my God, the House isn't going to be in session for a month. Does anybody know how much actually gets done early on in a session? Like, not a whole lot. I mean, the State House, the only thing they have to do every year is pass a budget. And that's in the end of June. So let's not pretend that there's like vital legislation that would be getting passed otherwise. It's just not accurate. That's just not reality. So, what happens now? I don't know. So the other thing is, in response to all this, Speaker Rozzi put together this working group of 3 rank and file members from each side. And they did this, they're going on like a statewide listening tour to try to come up with a bipartisan set of rules and all this. I think that, quite honestly, is kind of a joke. It's a PR stunt. By bringing in 3 rank and file members from each side with the thought that they're going to basically go back and tell the caucus leadership on both sides what to do, and they're going to do it. It's incredibly naive. Anybody that knows how that place works knows that's not, there's a reason that those members aren't in leadership, and they're, unless it's just absolutely the most minor little tweaks. If it's anything substantial, they're just not going to go for it. And I say that given, at least one of the members on the committee are, I find it, I personally can't take it seriously. And the other thing is, these listening sessions got real crazy, and that, it's been a good springboard for, good government groups and interest groups to go out and talk about, things that are far beyond. But it also took a very odd turn last week when a lobbyist went in and made an allegation of sexual harassment against a sitting lawmaker, party name as yet unknown. But, that opens up a whole other can of worms, about how that could be dealt with and what the implications of that could be. And, there's a lot of moving parts here. But I feel like this speaker's working group is just window dressing. I don't know if it was a delay tactic. I don't know what it is. But we're getting to the point where the rubber's going to meet the road, because after these special elections, assuming the 3 Democrats win and they're sworn in, then what? Right? You have a Democratic majority. Although it is telling, and I thought a bit odd, that Rozzi made it clear that he would not caucus with the Democrats. And the thing was, oh, well, that's not what the speaker does. That's not true. The speaker always caucuses with their party. Always. Now on the floor, they're supposed to be, kind of working for everybody and impartial and whatever, but even that's not reality. I mean, I've seen numerous times where, Republican speakers, Mike Turzai was infamous for this. I mean, would just straight up ignore the rules and just, ram through partisan agendas, because it's a self-governing body. There's no one to complain to. Like, there's no, they make the rules, they can break the rules. You might not like it, but I've seen it happen more times than I can count. So, like, that's also been a little disingenuous. This thought that, the speaker doesn't caucus with his or her own party. Yeah, they do. They do. I've seen it. Everybody knows it. So I'm not quite sure what exactly the end game that Speaker Rozzi is looking to achieve here. I'm not sure he knows what it is. I do think that if there is a clear path to get his amendment passed, I think that's something Democrats should be worried about. Would he basically throw out I don't know, is the baby in the bathwater? I don't know if that's the right analogy here, but would he basically eat voter ID and the regulatory amendment to get the sexual assault amendment? I don't know. As of right now, it doesn't seem like it. But who knows that, right now it's easy because everybody's kind of in a holding wait and see pattern. That's going to change after these 3 special elections. Now, it should also be noted, as if, again, there just weren't enough layers to this onion. It should also be noted that there is there was a Republican state rep who just won a special election to fill a vacant Senate seat. So there will be one less Republican member fairly soon. I'm not sure I don't think they've figured out the timeline for any of that. But I don't think that will matter, really. I mean, it's really, you're going to be 101 Democrats, either 100 or 101 Republicans, and then Speaker Rozzi, who, the question is he a Democrat? Is he forging his own path? Does he have this votes to remain speaker? I mean, he's kind of like pissing off everybody, but is he doing it in a way that he's going to have grudging respect? I mean, there's a lot here. Also given the fact that Democratic leader Joanna McClinton is slated to be the first woman and the first woman of color to become Speaker of the State House, that cannot be ignored. That's certainly a big factor here. Mark Rozzi's a white guy. Not the best optics to a lot of folks. And remember, McClinton was chosen by the caucus. Internally, they said she's the pick. And Rozzi presumably supported that. So, lots and lots of moving parts. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. There's been a lot about this on all sides that I think have made the caucuses look not great. And we can talk about those specific pressure points along the way at some point. But my thought was this: if you were the Democrats, your first, you needed to look at this as though there's the Hippocratic Oath. First rule: do no harm. The one thing you did not want to see happen was the Republicans to get the gavel in any way, shape, or form and advance that voter ID amendment. That was the one thing. You're like, whatever happens, don't let that thing happen. There were ways they could have potentially avoided that. I don't know if it was... There were a lot of people out there, both inside and outside the building, who were doing a lot of head scratching as some of this strategy was playing out. Not to say it was wrong, because no one knows how it's going to turn out. And obviously everybody's privy to different information and different strategies. But there have been a lot of questions that have been asked, and I don't think anybody quite knows the answer yet. But if the goal was to keep the Republicans from having any control, I don't know if that's been accomplished or not. But we shall see. And I think the one thing that we can be certain of is more uncertainty, right? No matter what you think is going to happen, it probably is not going to happen, because that's just how that institution functions. I mean, they just cannot, they just can't get out of their own damn way. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. It's just, just the way the institution is, and lower legislative chambers are messy often by design. It's not, so this isn't necessarily a knock on the people or whatever. It's just super hard to get anything done in that building. And even under normal circumstances, and these are far from normal circumstances. The problem here is the stakes are different for many different people and factions. They're not being very well defined publicly. There's no clear unity in a lot of this. This is a lot more nuanced than a lot of people think. In terms of what's going to happen next, there are issues about committee chairs, and everybody's looking out for themselves, which has someone who worked there, you kind of have to do, right? It's you can get stepped on very easily. as the late, and this would be a good way to bring it full circle, as the late Tony DeLuca once said, everybody's got to get their beak wet. And I think right now there's a lot of folks figuring out the best way to do that. And there's a lot of jockeying at the bird feeder. So that's where it sits. If you have any questions about this, please drop some comments. I'm doing something a little different. Instead of doing just an audio podcast, I'm doing audio and video. That seems to be a model that people seem to enjoy. So, and of course, who wouldn't want to look at this face constantly, right? So we're going to do a combination of audio and video. I may experiment with some live streams. There's a lot of different things we can do, but I want to just kind of get this little threshold one out into the ether. In the meantime, please check out the Keystone Reckoning Pack, which is Keystone Reckoning project, or KeystoneReckoning.com. That's a political action committee where we work to really do very brash and bold messaging to help get Democrats elected up and down the ballot, including in off years like this one. Also check out our partner, truebluegear.com. That is swag, t-shirts, everything else for democratic and progressive causes that we work with. And if you get a chance, please like and follow us on social media at Keystone Reckoning, and also give us a positive review on the podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. So until next time, this is Jesse White, and I look forward to speaking with you. Thank you very much.